All right, good afternoon, everybody. I apologize if I'm a little sluggish to begin with. My brain is still trying to process what Kim Brooks was saying yesterday, so just trying to slow down enough. Before I begin, since I'm one of the last speakers at this amazing conference, I just want to take a moment on behalf of the Faculty of Law at the University of Alberta to thank all the people who've come and helped us learn about the future of law, and just recognize what we've done here in the sense of reflecting upon our core mission as a law school. Part of my message in this talk is that changing from old and cherished ways of doing things is very difficult. And it is important, and it can be extremely rewarding if you're willing to openly critique where you are and think about where you wish to go. And I suspect that while all of us who've attended will benefit, my selfish hope is that the University of Alberta will take a special benefit by having had this on our home turf, in the sense of having had so many of our faculty and students be able to attend this conference, and we'll be able to use this discussion as a way to catalyze future growth over the next 100 years. So I'd like to personally thank Dean Bryden and Ted DeCoste and the faculty for having the vision to create this conference. And though I know he will hate me doing this, I'd like to say a special word of thanks to my office neighbor, Professor Eric Adams, a very good friend of mine, who I know has done much of the legwork to get this amazing conference. My one regret about having Eric drive this forward with his vision and enthusiasm is that we've been unable to hear from the wisdom of Professor Eric Adams, who I trust very deeply as someone who thinks a lot about the future of law. So thank you, Eric, for putting this together. I've heard many tremendous talks over the yeah, I asked for extra time for that, actually. I've heard many tremendous talks over the last 3 days, most of them centering on what a law school should be and how perhaps our focus needs to change and how we maybe need to adapt our needs to suit what the profession needs. All of these are very worthwhile topics of discussion. I am going to focus on something a little bit more narrow, but in my opinion, no less important, which is the future of law teaching. We've heard how change is happening in the profession. I've heard a lot about how government and wider society is putting different demands on us and law students. I think all of us who are teaching need to recognize that on a more basic level another change is going on, and that is occurring in our classrooms, and it's occurring in the way in which students learn today. And I think that change has gone, for many of us, a bit unnoticed. I have no doubt that every generation of law students learns differently, but I think there is something special going on with this generation over the last 10 years. And that is because of changes in technology that are affecting both the way in which students process information and from the way in which they learn in the classroom. I share the views of Stephen Friedland, apparently one of the best law teachers in the US, I learned today, in the idea of how students are changing. And I say that because I've seen it before my own eyes. My career spans that change, and it's been very interesting to process. So what does this mean for us? Ian Holloway said yesterday, and I personally couldn't agree more, that we need to spend more time figuring out whether what we are doing to teach our students works and what doesn't work. How are we teaching our students? There needs to be a great deal of critical self-reflection on what we are doing and whether or not it's actually working. Are we doing enough to meet the needs of this generation and how they process? These are things that I spend a fair bit of time worrying about, probably, as Eric will say, too much time worrying about. And I think for all our efforts in curriculum reform and defining who we wish to be, I think that reconsidering the way we teach on the ground in each class has to be a critical part of the future of law school. And what I'm going to say today is just my own personal contribution to that. I don't put this forth as the answer. It's just something that I have tried to do. But if we want students to succeed, I think we need to be asking the right questions, including, how do I know my students are learning? What can I do to make them better thinkers, lawyers, global citizens, whatever your term is? And I will say that I don't think these are easy questions to answer. I think they're incredibly difficult questions for a number of reasons. And one reason is, I don't think we're experts in this. I really don't. I like to say that I've come to this through trial and much error. I have been trying to see what I can do to work with my students, and I'm still trying, as many of my students will be happy to tell you. I'm still trying and failing from time to time. In my career, I've been lucky enough to work as a full-time faculty member at 5 different law schools. And this sheds a lot of interest, and I'm sure this will resonate with many of you, of the type of instruction I got when I was sent out to teach for the first time. Every time I started at the law school, the preparation was pretty much the same. The dean or the vice dean would welcome me to the faculty, they'd tell me what my courses were, and say, have at it. That was more or less what I was told to do. And so it's not surprising that I taught the way I was taught. So when I started back in the 90s, I taught like they had taught forever. So as classes got bigger and bigger, it was a lot of me standing at the front of the room talking. My first class at the University of Auckland had 80 students. I wasn't about to start trying innovative ways of teaching. I lectured and thought I would do the best I could in that particular exercise. And that's me as I teach and standing. Whoops, sorry, not that one. That zipped a little bit forward. Sorry. I asked questions. I got answers, and answers from a keen group of students that started at 20 and eventually dwindled down to 5, as many of you have experienced. I would open the floor to questions. We had a few good class discussions. Some days were good, some days were not so good. I made jokes and everything went well. It's probably the same as many other experiences of professors in this room. And then one day it wasn't so good. I was teaching and I found somewhere around 2005, I realized that in larger classes I was seeing more of this than I was seeing eager students. They were transfixed by computers and barely awake. And I should caveat this, because some of those students are in this room right now. This was not an actual class. This was for entertainment purposes only. But while that's an exaggeration, I bet many of you have seen it. I bet you've seen it in your classrooms, and I just know you have because I've sat in on classrooms where I've seen it. I've walked by classrooms where I've seen it, and many of you wish you hadn't seen it, but it's happening. This disturbed me a great deal, and I started thinking about why it was happening. And I came down to about 3 major factors that I think have changed the way in which students, and of course I didn't just come up with these, I actually read about it and tried to figure out why it was happening. 3 things I'm sure will not surprise you. Perhaps the third one will. The first is laptops in the classroom. Laptops appeared in 2000, where I was, in the mid-2000s, and suddenly there was an intermediate force in between me and the student. I could no longer see the student because they were crouching behind a laptop. That's only been furthered, of course, by factor number 2, which is wireless in the classroom, which has allowed students to engage in a range of different distractions that were before not available to them. And it is very difficult, obviously, to reach them when they have these other things available. It makes it more challenging. But I wish to say, I don't think this is just about students paying attention. And that's what I think is the third factor. Many people believe it's just, well, they're not paying attention. They have other distractions. I don't think that's it. There's a third factor, which is that these students have a different way of learning, and they are simply not able to learn in the way they did 50 years ago. All the research that I've been reading and my own experience is that students don't process as well from a simple discussion at the front of the class. They are too easily distracted. They are used to multitasking, and these sorts of things make it more difficult for us to reach them in the way that we did. And let me just say that it's also a qualitative issue. It wasn't just the students weren't paying attention. I noticed, and maybe it was apocryphal in my own experience, I noticed that the quality of their comprehension was dwindling as well. Around this time, obviously not paying attention, I personally tend to think classroom time is important, and students were losing focus, and I felt they weren't comprehending what I wanted. Whether it was a written assignment or an exam, I wasn't getting back the quality of answers that I was hoping for, and obviously this was bothering me. I heard similar things from colleagues as I probed who would complain about the students of today, and tell me if you've heard that one before, and how poorly many are doing or not paying attention. And what I finally took from this, after thinking about it in great detail, and let's be honest, I complain the odd time about the students as well, I just realized my teaching wasn't working anymore. That's what was the big realization for me. Students were less interested and the instruction was having less impact, so something had to change. I started to do some serious self-reflection because I realized that it was my responsibility to take over the classroom. That's what I was being paid for, and that was my job. And it's not enough to just complain about the people who are the recipients of our product. If a few students are doing badly, by all means, maybe they're not working hard enough, but if all the students are not getting the lessons I'm trying to instruct, or large portions of them, well, really, that's my fault. And even today, I hear students complaining that the exams they're getting are poor. Well, I tell them to look in the mirror, because really, if you're not doing enough to get your students to realize what you want them to achieve, it's up to you to do a better job and ensure that they can give you back what you want. So what can we do about it? Well, I know a lot of different techniques have been tried, and I thought about banning laptops from the classroom, and I know some of you have done this, and that's certainly your choice. I did not want to do this. I personally cannot write by hand anymore. I don't know about the rest of you, and I know that many students would, first of all, rebel, and second of all, really be disadvantaged from their inability to really follow and take notes in the classroom. So I decided instead to change my mode of teaching. And what I did was I moved to a problem-solving environment. I started with this in the Law of Evidence, which is my primary course, and I did this for a number of different reasons. First of all, I wanted a class that was active. I really wanted students to be doing things in the classroom, and instead of transmitting information through a lecture, I wanted to use problems to identify principles and allow them to improve their fact application. So that was a very, very important thing for me. I was able to do that also as a way of critiquing the law. I apologize, I had one last bullet. Critiquing the law in addition to actually extracting principles from it. And I jumped in and tried this for a year. I just said, okay, let's do problem solving, no more lecturing, that's it. I would give them readings, we would do problems. And I had mixed success. Problem solving was a great way of stimulating student interest, no question. It was a great way of making the class more accessible, and I thought everything improved. I thought the exams were better. But many students told me afterwards, privately and through evaluations, that they were confused. And one of the reasons they didn't like what was going on is because they felt they didn't have enough information to get into the problems. They felt that they couldn't contextualize it properly, and it inhibited their learning experience. So what I realized was that there is a core purpose to the lecture. There is something about explaining concepts to students that is extremely vital, as much as you can get out of problems. The text alone is often not enough to transmit the concepts effectively. The students need something more. And what they need is the professor's guidance to understand how the concept fits into bigger issues, how the actual rule functions, so that we can get to the more complex application that I'm trying to do with problems. It's certainly one thing, and I've just chosen an evidentiary example, they can read a definition of prejudice, but they need more to actually understand what that means before they can try and experience it. So I decided I had to do something else. And what I decided to do is the topic of the rest of my time here today, and that is I created something that I have called law capsules. Nothing proprietary about it, just a term that I found did what I was hoping to do. So what are capsules? Capsules are short computer-generated lectures. They're designed to effectively provide students with what I would normally do in the first 20 minutes of a class. They run 10 to 20 minutes in length. They're available to students before class. They are created using applications designed for tablets, which have been an amazing revolution in the way in which we can deliver information. And they're intended not to teach students everything, but to give students a platform to move forward. Basic concepts before class each day. And I took this route for a number of different reasons. Whoops, I really got to figure out how many bullets I have. I took this route for a number of different reasons. Number one, I didn't want to lecture. So I had moved problem solving and I liked it. I liked the way the class was animated. So I didn't want to inhibit that by starting off with the first 20 minutes of lecturing. Number two, it would take time. Problem solving, it really takes a lot of time in the classroom. So if I'm lecturing for the first 20, I've lost that time. And third of all, I know from experience that if you start the class off with boredom, it's a little more difficult to supercharge it in the second half. But what was even more important was my realization that trying to commit or convey information with this generation of students is often less efficient if I do it by standing. This guy down there trying to lecture at you right now and hold your attention. But really, why should I restrict myself to lecturing in that environment and perhaps scribbling a few things on the whiteboard when up here in the virtual world I have a great deal more control over what I'm doing? Frankly, access to a lot of tools I can only dream of down there. Many of them are available as easy as snapping my fingers. Thanks to the magic of tablet technology, I now have a rich working space that allows me to visually present any idea I want. It's easy to add graphics and connect things to one another in order to present exactly what I want to students. voiceover to visuals in real time and communicate with students in a range of different ways. It's also easy to provide graphics and relate them to a particular topic we're discussing. I can then add explanation and provide context to the problem that's being discussed in class. And finally, by using graphs and diagrams, I can start to relate to the growing number of students who just don't process information through lecture well. They prefer to relate to concepts visually. And the more I do that, the more likely I am to reach them. And that's not all. Capsules are also better for students, namely because they can watch them on their own time. You can watch capsules when you're having your morning coffee. You can even listen to them while you're going on your way to class. You can watch capsules before bed. You can watch capsules while enjoying the late summer sun. You can even watch capsules while you're on the LRT. And most importantly, unlike a lecture, students are able to access capsules before class, which makes it that much more likely that everything we do in class is really going to sink in. And after the class is over, capsules don't just evaporate in thin air. They're available for students who want to refresh and go back and really make sure they understood what was going on. All that means I don't have to just keep repeating myself every year, transmitting basic information. Instead, I can do the easy stuff up here and leave the heavy lifting to that guy talking to you down there. So take it away. Well, thank you. It's a handsome fellow. It's just a shame about the hair. The idea of presenting prepackaged explanations of foundational material that students can use to perform better in class is not something I invented by any means. It's referred to in a number of ways. We've heard some of them referred to here: blended learning, the flipped classroom. But what's amazing is with the technology that's now available, any professor can create this material very, very cheaply. I did it with a tablet and a $5 application. That's all I needed to actually create all sorts of educational material for my students. The more I do it, the better I get at it. I'm much quicker. That whole thing, not counting the actual video things, which took a little bit longer, but the actual putting together took me about 20 minutes. It wasn't very hard to do. It gets easier as you go on. Why did I do it? I've already hinted, but let's talk about what my objectives were in using these capsules to help students learn. One, I wanted them to have a better understanding. So on day one, they'd walk in and they'd understand what I was talking about, or at least the basics, so we could then move on to much harder material from the outset. I don't know if everybody knows this or not, because it was sometimes a shock to me, but students, no matter how many readings you give them, they come to class and they're often still not quite clear what many of the concepts are. So having that material before class, critical. Class time is valuable. I treat every minute of class time as precious, and it is absolutely essential that I use it wisely. Students' focus, to me, is critical. I am a big believer in student choice. And I say choice because I actually believe, and you may call this crazy, that if I give students the same lecture on a capsule, they'll process it better than the lecture in class. And the reason for that is that they get to choose when they watch it. Students come to class and you think they choose to be there. They don't freely choose to be there. There's peer pressure involved. They feel they have to be there. Many of them have other things going on. Plus, they can watch things on their computer. When they're watching their computer, that's what they're doing. They may pause it, they may go other places, but I find that they watch it and they get it, and that's what they've told me. Accessibility, of course, they can return to it when they wish. So there are many, many benefits to it. But if you don't believe me, I'd rather hear from the people who did it, and maybe you would too.
Talking about having the capsules, what was your overall impression of them as a learning tool?
I thought they were terrific. They were a great supplement to the classroom experience. Lots of times in law school, the information comes by very quickly. The capsules allowed me to prepare for class by having an understanding of the concepts that were going to be discussed, even though I might not fully understand them in advance. And then I would often use them again after class to reinforce what I learned or to fill in blanks in places that I hadn't recorded properly in my notes or whatever. So I thought they were invaluable for myself.
My overall impression of capsules as a learning tool was very positive. I thought that it was unique and novel in terms of my law school career, but also found them to be very helpful in preparing for class and honing in on the exact points we'd be covering.
I particularly appreciated them. I think it's just another avenue to ensure that the learning happens, and it happens in place and in space of where we want it to happen. That I could access before class, after class. I'd like to have the capsules actually in practice.
Besides what I've mentioned already, the ability to kind of have a heads up what's coming, is a chance to go back and review the information, the problems, and the concepts over and over and over in the voice or the style of the professor that I'm learning from. So a great way to reinforce the information, make sure I get it right.
We looked at the capsule each day before the class. I thought that it was a nice way to introduce the concepts from the class, and then during the class to have a little bit more elaboration on each of the topics. So again, not being totally lost going into class, where some of the readings were a little bit unclear as to what was meant, and having the professor actually talk you through that was really useful to me.
The greatest benefit to myself was to have a rundown of what was coming in class, so that instead of getting new concepts brand new in class and scrambling to record them and understand them, I already kind of had an understanding of what was coming. So the recording time was more focused on the presentation by the professor, the problem solving, the different aspects of the information, instead of trying to comprehend it initially from scratch.
I would say the use of the visuals definitely helped me understand some of the more difficult points in the law. I'm a visual person, and that always helps me, whether the professor uses visuals on the board in class or ahead of time with something like a capsule. The advantage to it being in the capsule, you don't have to wait for class for some of these concepts to be hashed out. You can really get help from the visuals ahead of time. So once you're in class and you can have the discussions, you already have some of those things sorted out.
I was able to survey the students after class, and I'm pleased to report that 100% of students thought it helped them for class. I mean, they all used them, and they were all positive about the way in which it worked. Not surprisingly, they'd like to see them in other classes as well, because they thought it was useful to their learning. And in case any of you were wondering, I thought I'd throw up this last graphic. Is it a reason to skip class? Because that's the question I've been asked sometime. And by and large, my attendance in that class was no different than any other class I've taught. There were some students absent, but by and large, it was the same as anything else. It's not a reason to skip class because it's not the class. You're not going to get enough to perform well in that class from just the capsule. My summary of benefits, what I think you're getting out of capsules and what you can do if you switch to different ways of transmitting information. Obviously, it saves class time. I've already raised that, which I think is really important to make the best use of the resource that we have. I think it enriches student comprehension. They start off in a better place, and I think they end up in a better place because of it. I think it makes students more likely to engage in class. That's a benefit I hadn't talked about already. It's simply because students feel comfortable. They don't like being put on the spot when they have no idea about a concept, and if they feel they have some, it's a better starting place. Engages with visual learners. I like to use a lot of graphics because I believe students process information that way, and there's a lot of studies that tend to show that. Saves me from repeating myself. I've offloaded a lot of information onto capsules, and I don't have to get up and just keep giving the same old lecture every year, which I don't enjoy doing. And students can return at their leisure. Obviously, the material is accessible, and it's accessible repeatedly to all students. Future of law school, in my opinion, has to focus, whatever way you do it, on better teaching. And I think it has to recognize that we have to give students opportunities to learn in a way that suits their needs and their learning styles. In my experience, that means a lot more active modes of learning and less lecturing in front of the class. I think that lecturing creates a passive activity that mostly stimulates note-taking skills from the students. Studies show that students want more engagement, and I think they want to test their skills in the classroom each day. And to do that well, I believe students still need professors to provide them with critical information, one way or another. And this is certainly one way of doing that. I just will finish up by saying one last comment. Like most of you, I heard Gillian Hatfield speak on Friday, and I really enjoyed her talk, and she spoke at length about the way in which we need to change, perhaps in the way in which we teach. I agreed with much of what she said, but I did take issue with one aspect of the closing part of her presentation, and I told her so I'm not just saying behind her back what she's not here to respond to today. So I did tell her this. She said that it was easy to switch. It's easy. It's out there. It's easy. And I'm like, it is not easy. I'm telling you. I'm not going to lie to you. None of this is easy. I'm still struggling with the mix, and I've been doing it for a while. It is hard and it requires reflection and effort, but I do believe it's incredibly, incredibly important if we're to succeed in our core mission of educating a new generation of law students. If we're going to be a knowledge community, as Professor Arthurs pointed out yesterday, I think we have to do everything we can to ensure that today's students are able to share in that knowledge transmission in a way that meets their needs today and not just the needs of the faculty who are teaching them and the way in which we've done things historically. Thank you very much.